What if the poorest waitress in the restaurant carried on her skin the only proof that you were a grandmother? For Madeleine Montgomery, the matriarch of New York's elite, that proof appeared when she least expected it. A crescent-shaped birthmark, the same one she had kissed on the tiny arm of her stolen baby 50 years ago. But that was impossible. Her daughter had died. Or had she? What city are you watching this video from, and what time is it? By the way, if you're enjoying my videos, I'd be so happy if you could subscribe to my channel and like this video. The Astor Room was a temple of glass and gold in the heart of the Upper East Side. Its marble tables gleamed under Murano crystal chandeliers, and the murmur of million-dollar deals filled the air, scented with truffles and champagne. It was the kind of place where a single bottle of wine cost more than an ordinary worker's monthly salary. Madeleine Montgomery occupied her usual table by the window overlooking Park Avenue. At 78, she was still an imposing woman, her silver hair pulled back in a flawless bun, her jewelry discreet but priceless, and those gray eyes that had seen empires built and destroyed. The Montgomery Group, her corporate conglomerate, controlled everything from skyscrapers to hotel chains, from technology to media. Mother, I need you to sign the authorization for the Aerotech merger, insisted her son. Edward, a 52-year-old man dressed in a $5,000 suit. There's $500 million at stake. Madeleine nodded distractedly, but her attention had drifted to the constant motion of the restaurant. The waitstaff glided between tables like silent dancers, carrying silver trays and crystal glasses. There was something hypnotic in their routine, something that reminded her of a very different time in her life. A young waitress approached their table. She wasn't like the other servers, who were often middle-class students with artistic aspirations. This girl had something different. Her black uniform was impeccable, but you could see the wear on the cuffs. Her brown hair, pulled back in a ponytail, showed a few rebellious strands, as if she had run to get to work on time. More water, sir, ma'am? The young woman asked, her voice soft but clear. Her accent had the warmth of the working-class boroughs, far from Manhattan. Edward waved her away, already absorbed in his phone, but Madeleine's eyes weren't on the waitress's face. They were fixed on her right arm. As she leaned over the table to pour the water, the girl's sleeve had ridden up slightly, revealing the pale skin of her forearm. And there it was, a small, perfect crescent moon-shaped birthmark, light brown, just above her right wrist. Time stopped. The restaurant's murmur faded to a dull roar in Madeleine's ears. Her heart began to pound against her ribs with a frantic, painful rhythm. It couldn't be. After all these years, it just couldn't be. There were millions of birthmarks in the world, but not like this one. Not in that exact shape. Not in that precise location. She knew every curve, every imperfection of that crescent. She had stroked it, kissed it, cried over it during the long nights in the hospital. A sound escaped her lips, a choked, agonizing gasp that was completely alien to the refined atmosphere of the Astor Room. Her trembling hand flew to her mouth, her eyes filled with tears she hadn't shed in decades. "That mark," she whispered, her voice trembling as she pointed with a shaky finger. Where did you get that mark?" The young waitress, whose name tag read Sarah, looked from the weeping billionaire to the mark on her arm, her face a canvas of confusion and alarm. The contrast was surreal. The most powerful woman in New York, breaking down in tears over a birthmark on the arm of a waitress earning minimum wage. I was born with it, ma'am," Sarah replied, instinctively covering the mark with her other hand. "Are you all right?" But Madeleine could no longer hear. An avalanche of memories, locked away for 50 years, had been unleashed, taking her back to a summer in 1973 when she wasn't the matriarch of an empire, but a 28-year-old girl in love with the wrong man. It was the hottest summer New York had seen in decades. Madeleine Bishop hadn't yet taken the Montgomery name. She worked in her father's art gallery in Greenwich Village. It was a respectable job for a young lady from a good family. Something artistic but controlled. Something to keep her busy until she found a suitable husband. That's where she met Leo Mancini. Leo was everything her parents despised. A painter with no money, no family name, no secure future. But he had something none of her family's approved suitors possessed: passion. His dark eyes lit up when he talked about art. His strong hands were always stained with paint. And when he looked at her, Madeline felt like she was the only woman in the world. Their romance was secret, stolen in furtive encounters in dark cafes and secluded parks. Leo lived in a tiny studio in the East Village, where the air smelled of turpentine and dreams. There, among unfinished canvases and dirty brushes, they loved each other with the intensity of those who know their time is limited. When Madeline discovered she was pregnant, she knew the moment of truth had arrived. She told Leo first, and he held her with tears in his eyes, promising they would find a way to be together, to raise their child with love instead of money. But plans of love rarely survive the realities of power. Madeline's parents, Mr. and Mrs. Bishop, weren't just wealthy. They were old-money American aristocracy, with connections that stretched back to the founding of the country. When they discovered the pregnancy and the father's identity, their reaction was swift and merciless. "That starving artist has ruined our reputation," her father had shouted, pacing the living room of the family mansion like a furious bull. "A dime-a-dozen painter, a nobody who can't even support a woman." Her mother had been even crueler in her calculated coldness. "You will marry Richard Montgomery. He's a good businessman from a good family. The baby will be given up for adoption immediately after birth. No one ever needs to know about this mistake." Richard Montgomery was indeed a good match. Heir to an industrial fortune, intelligent, ambitious, and willing to marry Madeline despite the circumstances. He was 12 years older than her, gentle in his own way, but he didn't love her with the madness she had known with Leo. "But it's my child," Madeline had pleaded, her hands protectively on her still flat stomach. "It's your error," her mother had replied with finality, "and we will correct it." They sent Madeline to a private clinic upstate, an elegant, discreet place where the daughters of wealthy families solved their problems. She spent the last 4 months of her pregnancy there, reading, embroidering, and feeling her daughter move inside her as her heart slowly broke. Leo tried to contact her. Her parents had hired men to ensure he couldn't get close. The last letter he managed to get to her said simply, "I love you. Love our child for both of us." The birth was long and painful. When she finally heard her baby's cry, she knew her heart would never be whole again. The nurse allowed her to hold her just once, for only 5 minutes. The baby was perfect. Dark curly hair like Leo's, eyes that promised to be gray like hers, and right above her right wrist, a perfect, crescent moon-shaped birthmark. "She's beautiful," Madeline whispered, kissing the small mark. "I'll call you Luna, my little Luna." But Luna would not be her name. The adoptive parents were already waiting, a faceless couple whose only qualifications were their ability to pay and their promise to move far away, where no one could ask uncomfortable questions. When they took the baby, Madeline felt them tear a part of her soul away. She married Richard 3 months later, in a ceremony that was more funeral than celebration. Edward was born 2 years later, and although she loved her son, there was always an empty space in her heart, shaped exactly like a crescent moon. For 50 years, she had hired private investigators, followed false leads, and wept in silence every August 15th, Luna's birthday. They never found anything. The adoption records had been sealed, the adoptive parents had vanished without a trace, and her little Luna had faded into the night as if she had never existed. Until now. "Ma'am, do you need me to call someone?" Sarah's worried voice brought her back to the present. The young waitress had crouched beside her chair, her eyes filled with a genuine compassion that pierced Madeline's heart like an arrow. "What's your name?" Madeline whispered, wiping her tears with a linen napkin. "Sarah Johnson, ma'am. Sarah. Pierce Johnson." The name hit her like a bolt. Pierce. It had been her mother's maiden name. "Carmen Pierce Bishop. How old are you, child?" 26, ma'am. 50 years. A daughter. A granddaughter. The math fit perfectly. Were you adopted? The question slipped from Madeline's lips before she could stop it. Sarah recoiled slightly, her expression changing from concern to caution. How did you know that?" Madeline's world tilted. It was real. After 5 decades of searching, her granddaughter was standing in front of her, waiting tables for minimum wage, with no idea who she really was. "Your adoptive mother?" Madeline asked, her voice trembling. "What was her name?" "Her name was Soledad Pierce," Sarah replied, her voice now tinged with suspicion. She died 3 years ago. But I don't understand why... Soledad Pierce. Her family's name. The pieces were falling into place in a way that was too specific to be a coincidence. Edward, who had been ignoring the conversation while checking emails, finally looked up, noticing the intensity of the situation. "Mother, what's going on? Why are you crying?" But Madeline couldn't take her eyes off Sarah. She studied every detail of her face, searching for traces of Leo, traces of herself, traces of the family she had lost. The shape of her eyes was familiar, the curve of her chin. "Sarah," she said softly, "I need to ask you a very important question. Did your adoptive mother tell you anything about your biological family? Anything at all?" The young waitress looked nervously around the restaurant. Other patrons had begun to notice the unusual scene of the billionaire Madeline Montgomery crying while speaking to a server. She only told me my biological mother was very young, and that she came from a very wealthy family, that they gave me up because they couldn't take care of me." Sarah paused. "But ma'am, this is very personal, and I'm at work." "You have a small scar behind your left ear," Madeline interrupted sharply. Sarah's eyes widened. Unconsciously, her hand moved to the spot behind her left ear. "How do you know that?" Madeline stood up so abruptly that her chair toppled backward with a crash that echoed through the restaurant. Her legs trembled, but her voice found a strength it hadn't had in decades. "Because I was there when you got it. You were 6 months old. You fell from the hospital bed and got a small cut. The doctor said it would leave a permanent mark. The silence that followed was so thick you could cut it with a knife." Sarah was paralyzed, her hand still touching the scar that no one else knew about, staring at this powerful woman who knew impossible details about her infancy. That's impossible," Sarah stammered. "You are my granddaughter," Madeline said, the words coming out like a prayer, a confession, a miracle. "You are the daughter of my daughter, Luna. I have been looking for you for 50 years. Before we continue, please take a moment to leave a comment about this story and rate it from 1 to 10. How are you feeling? If there's anything you'd like to share, I'm always here to listen. I hope you find a moment of peace and reflection as you follow this healing story and its journey of courage and justice." Edward shot to his feet, knocking over his wine glass, the red liquid spreading across the white tablecloth like blood. "Mother, what are you talking about?" "What daughter? I am your only child." But Madeline couldn't look away from Sarah, who had backed away several steps, her face as pale as paper. "No," Sarah whispered, shaking her head. "No, this can't be real. You're Madeline Montgomery. I'm just a waitress. This doesn't make any sense." "Sense doesn't matter when it comes to blood," Madeline replied, holding out a trembling hand toward her long-lost granddaughter. "What matters is that I found you. After all these years, I finally found you." The restaurant had fallen into absolute silence. All eyes were fixed on the surreal scene. The richest woman in New York, weeping and trembling, trying to touch the hand of a young waitress who looked like she was about to faint. Sarah looked at the outstretched hand, then at Madeline's face, then at her own birthmark, her world, her identity. Everything she thought she knew about herself was unraveling in real time. "My biological mother," she asked, her voice barely audible. "Her name was Luna," Madeline whispered. "I named her Luna for the mark on your arm, but I never got to know her. They took her from me the day she was born, just like they took her from you." Tears began to roll down Sarah's cheeks. They weren't tears of joy, but of pure shock, of a reality that was too big to process. "This can't be happening," she murmured. "I have to go. I have to—" She turned to flee, but Madeline's voice stopped her. "Sarah, wait," the billionaire cried, her composure completely abandoned. "Please, don't run away from me too!" The cry echoed through the Astor room, a desperate sound that held 50 years of accumulated grief. Other diners began to pull out their phones, capturing the moment one of the most powerful women in America fell completely apart. Sarah stopped at the restaurant's entrance, her hand on the doorframe, tears streaming down her face. She turned slowly to look at Madeleine one last time. "If this is real," she said, her voice choked. "If I'm really your granddaughter, why? Why couldn't my mother keep me? Why did I have to grow up with nothing? The question hit Madeline like a physical slap. 50 years of guilt, of regret, of what-ifs crowded her throat. "Because I was young and foolish," she said, the truth raw and painful. "Because I let my family tell me what to do. Because I chose security over love, and I have paid the price for it every single day since." Sarah studied her for a long moment, seeing not the feared and respected billionaire, but a broken woman who had lost the most important thing in her life. "I have to think," she said finally. This is too much." She left, leaving Madeline standing in the middle of New York's most exclusive restaurant, surrounded by strangers staring with a mixture of fascination and pity. Edward rushed to his mother's side, his face a mask of confusion and growing alarm. "Mother, what just happened? What daughter are you talking about? And what does this mean for the company, for our family?" Madeline turned to her son, and for the first time in her life, she saw his true nature reflected in his eyes. It wasn't love she saw, but fear. Fear that his inheritance, his position, his future were all in jeopardy. "Edward," she said calmly, wiping her tears and regaining some of her natural composure, "what you just witnessed is going to change everything, and I suggest you prepare for it." That night, Madeline sat in her private study in the family mansion, surrounded by portraits of ancestors and trophies from a lifetime of success. But for the first time in decades, she didn't see the symbols of her power. She could only see a crescent moon birthmark and the frightened eyes of a granddaughter who had grown up. Believing she was alone in the world, she picked up her phone and dialed a number she hadn't used in years. "Detective Michael Vega, Private Investigations." "Michael, it's Madeline Montgomery. I need you to investigate something for me. It's urgent, and money is no object." She paused, looking out the window at the lights of Manhattan, spread out like scattered diamonds. "I need you to find every piece of information you can on a young woman named Sarah Pierce Johnson. Her adoption history, her adoptive parents, everything. Because I think I just found my long-lost granddaughter, and I need to understand how she ended up waiting tables when she should have been living in a palace." The search that had lasted 50 years had ended in the most unexpected place. But Madeline had a feeling the hardest part was just beginning. As she hung up the phone, a single question echoed in her mind. If Sarah was really her granddaughter, where had her daughter Luna been all these years? And most importantly, why had her granddaughter ended up in the arms of a woman named Soledad Pierce, who shared her own mother's family name? The answers to those questions would not only change Madeline's life, but would reveal a betrayal so deep it would shake the very foundations of everything she had believed for half a century. 3 days after the encounter at the Astor Room, private investigator Michael Vega, a 60-year-old NYPD veteran, showed up at the Montgomery mansion with a file that felt as heavy as lead. Madeline received him in her private study. This morning, the most powerful woman in New York looked fragile, as if the last few days had drained years of strength from her bones. "Mrs. Montgomery," Vega began, opening the file, "what I've found is disturbing. Are you sure you want the whole truth?" "Detective," Madeline said firmly, "I've lived with lies for 50 years. It's time to face the facts, no matter how painful." Vega nodded and pulled out the first photograph. It was a grainy, black-and-white copy of a birth certificate from 1973. Sarah, born August 15, 1973, at the Santa Teresa Clinic, the same clinic where you gave birth. But here's where it gets complicated. He placed a second photo on the desk. A death certificate. This is the death certificate for one Luna Bishop, dated August 16, 1973. One day after the birth, Madeline's heart stopped. "What do you mean she died?" "Sarah is alive. I saw her." "Keep looking," Vega said softly, placing a third document. "This is the adoption record for Sarah, processed by Soledad Pierce on August 17, 1973. According to these official papers, Soledad adopted an orphan baby whose mother had died in childbirth." Madeline studied the papers, her brilliant mind connecting dots she didn't want to connect. "This means someone falsified my daughter's death and orchestrated an illegal adoption, and that person had to have access to both hospital and state records." Her hands trembled as she touched the false death certificate. Who was Soledad Pierce? Why would she do this? Vega pulled out an older photo from the 70s. It showed a young woman in a nurse's uniform in front of the Santa Teresa Clinic. Soledad Pierce was a nurse at the clinic where you gave birth, but she was also something else. He paused dramatically. She was your mother's younger sister, Carmen Pierce Bishop's sister. The world stopped. Madeleine felt the floor open up beneath her. Her aunt. Her own aunt had stolen her child. My Aunt Soledad? She whispered, her voice breaking. The same, Vega confirmed. My research shows Soledad had always been resentful of the class difference between her and her sister. While Carmen married into aristocracy, Soledad worked her whole life as a nurse. When she saw the chance to take the baby her wealthy family had rejected, she stole her. Madeleine finished, the truth hitting her like an avalanche. My own family stole my daughter and made me believe she was dead. But Vega wasn't finished. He pulled out one last, more recent photo. It showed a middle-aged woman, clearly terminal, in a hospital bed. This is Soledad 3 years ago. Before she died, she confessed the truth to Sarah, that she wasn't her biological mother, but that she had been saved from a family that didn't want her. Madeleine stood abruptly, walking to the window overlooking her mansion's gardens. Did my parents know? According to bank records I found, your father, Mr. Bishop, made significant monthly payments to Soledad for over 20 years, ostensibly for handling sensitive family matters and to ensure her silence. The betrayal was total. They hadn't just taken her daughter. They had paid to keep the lie alive, to ensure she never found her. Detective, where is Sarah now? She lives in a small apartment in Washington Heights with her boyfriend, Miguel Santos. She's working 2 jobs to pay off the medical debt Soledad left behind. According to my sources, they're struggling financially. Madeleine closed her eyes, picturing her granddaughter, her own blood, living in poverty while she sat on billions. There's one more thing, Vega added carefully. Sarah is 3 months pregnant. The revelation hit like a lightning bolt. Not only had she found her granddaughter, she was about to be a great-grandmother. Does she know? Madeleine asked. Yes, but my sources say she's considering her options. The financial situation is dire. A cold, controlled fury began to build in Madeleine's chest. 50 years of pain, 50 years of a useless search. And now her granddaughter was considering terminating her pregnancy over money, while she had limitless resources. Detective Vega, she said, with the authority that had built empires. I need you to locate Sarah immediately, and I need you to prepare legal documents. There are going to be significant changes to my will. As Vega was preparing to leave, Edward appeared in the doorway. He'd been listening from the hall, his face pale as paper. Mother, he said tensely, we need to talk, immediately. After Vega left, Edward shut the study door with a click that sounded like a slam. Is it true? He asked, pacing like a caged animal. You really had another child. And that waitress is my niece? It's true, Madeleine confirmed calmly. And she's pregnant. You're going to be a great uncle. Edward stopped pacing. What does this mean? For the company? For my inheritance? I've worked my entire life to run the Montgomery Group, and now some stranger shows up who technically has a blood claim? Edward, Madeleine said, studying her son with new eyes. What I've just discovered is that my family betrayed me in the cruelest way possible. That my daughter has been alive for 50 years while I thought she was dead. That I have a granddaughter who grew up in poverty when she should have been an heiress. And the first thing out of your mouth is concern for your inheritance? Of course I'm concerned. Edward exploded. This company is my life. And now it turns out there might be another heir with legal standing. Madeleine sat slowly in her chair, seeing her son with a painful clarity. For all these years, she'd believed Edward was her only family, her only legacy. But now she realized she had raised a man whose love was conditional, based on money and power instead of blood and loyalty. Edward, have you ever loved me as your mother?
Or only as the owner of your financial future?
The question hung in the air like an accusation. Edward opened his mouth to protest, but the words didn't come. In that silence, Madeleine had her answer. I see. Then I really have been alone all these years. That evening, Madeleine drove her Mercedes to Washington Heights, a working-class neighborhood that was a world away from her mansion on the Upper East Side. The contrast was shocking. Worn-out apartment buildings, small shops with faded signs, and people walking with the determined hustle of those working long hours for little pay. She found Sarah's apartment in a 5-story walk-up. She climbed the stairs slowly, each step bringing her closer to a conversation that would change both their lives. When Sarah opened the door, her eyes widened in shock to see the billionaire standing on her small landing. "Mrs. Montgomery, what are you doing here?" "We need to talk," Madeline said simply. "About the truth. About your real mother. About why you grew up here instead of in a palace. And about why your great-aunt lied to you your entire life." The apartment was tiny but clean, furnished with the basics but kept with pride. Miguel Santos, Sarah's boyfriend, was a young mechanic with calloused hands and honest eyes. He was clearly uncomfortable with the presence of one of the richest women in America in his modest living room. "Sarah," Madeline began, pulling out the photos from Vega's file. "Your adoptive mother wasn't a stranger who gave you a home out of kindness. She was my aunt, my mother's sister, and she didn't legally adopt an orphan. She stole you." Sarah studied the documents, her face shifting from confusion to shock to fury as the truth unfolded. "You're telling me Soledad, the woman I called Mom my whole life, stole me from you? She stole you from your mother, my daughter Luna." Madeline pulled out a photo she'd kept hidden for decades. Herself at 28, pregnant, smiling with a protective hand on her stomach. "This was your mother. And this..." She placed the second photo on the table, the only image she had of baby Luna, taken during those precious 5 minutes before she was taken. The resemblance was undeniable. The same gray eyes, the same facial structure, even the same crescent moon birthmark. "Oh my God," Sarah whispered, touching the photograph with trembling fingers. Why? Why would she do that? Madeline told her the whole story. The forbidden love with Leo, the family pressure, the secret pregnancy, the forced adoption. But she also told her the new truth, that Soledad had seen an opportunity to have the child she never could, and she had taken it, no matter the emotional cost. Soledad was resentful, Madeline explained. Her sister, my mother, had married into wealth while she worked as a nurse. When she saw the chance to take something that belonged to the rich family that had looked down on her all her life, she took her revenge by stealing their baby, finished Miguel, who had been listening in silence. His voice was filled with a protective rage. That woman stole Sarah's entire identity. Sarah stood abruptly, walking to the small window that overlooked the bustling street below. All my life, she said, her voice breaking, I wondered why I was given up. Soledad always said my biological mother was too young, that she did what was best for me. I never suspected that you were kidnapped, Madeline said softly. By your great-grandmother's sister, who then spent 50 years cashing checks from my family to keep the secret. The silence that followed was thick with the weight of decades of lies. Finally, Sarah turned to face Madeline. What do you want from me now? She asked. Now that you know the truth. Madeline stood, approaching her granddaughter carefully. I want to know you, she said simply. I want to make up for 50 lost years. I want you to know you have a family that loves you, that has always loved you, even when we didn't know you were alive. She paused, glancing at Sarah's still flat stomach. And I want to make sure my great-grandchild never has to worry about money or education or opportunity. I want to give them everything I should have been able to give you. Tears began to flow down Sarah's cheeks. They weren't just tears of sadness, but also of relief. For her entire life, she had felt like something was missing, that there was a hole she couldn't explain. Now she knew why. Mrs. Montgomery. Grandmother. The word sounded strange on her lips. I don't know how to process all of this. I need time. Of course, Madeline said understandingly. But in the meantime, I want to do something immediately. She took out her phone and dialed a number. JP Morgan Private Bank. This is Madeline Montgomery. I need to set up a trust fund. Immediately. Yes, with immediate access to funds for medical emergencies and basic living expenses. The initial amount will be $5 million. Sarah and Miguel looked at each other wide-eyed. Grandmother, you can't. I can and I will, Madeline interrupted firmly. This isn't charity. It's restitution. It's the least I can do after my family stole the life you deserved. She hung up the phone and turned to the young couple. Sarah, Miguel, I want you to know this is only the beginning. There are legal documents to process, changes to my will to make, and a family to rebuild. But the most important thing right now is that you know you are no longer alone. She hugged Sarah for the first time, feeling 50 years of pain begin to heal in that simple gesture of connection. Never again, she whispered in her granddaughter's ear. You will never be alone again. But even as she held Sarah, Madeline knew the hardest part was coming. Edward would not easily accept a reduction in his inheritance. And when the news of a new Montgomery heiress hit the media, there would be consequences none of them could fully predict. The truth had been revealed, but the war for the future of the Montgomery Empire was just beginning. Edward would not easily accept a reduction in his inheritance. And when the war began, it did so with the calculated brutality of a man who had learned business from the most ruthless woman in America. The first battle was silent, but devastating. 3 days after Madeline established the trust fund for Sarah, Edward's lawyers filed a civil lawsuit, alleging that his mother had been the victim of an elaborate identity fraud. According to the legal documents, an opportunist had convinced the elderly and vulnerable Madeline that she was her long-lost granddaughter, emotionally manipulating her to gain access to the family fortune. How dare you? Madeline roared when Edward arrived at her study that morning with a triumphant smirk and a copy of the lawsuit. How dare you call me senile and vulnerable? Mother, Edward said with false concern, sitting in the chair opposite her desk as if he were the one running the meeting. You've obviously been the victim of a very sophisticated scam. This woman studied our family history, found out about your lost child, and fabricated a perfect story to manipulate your emotions. Madeline studied her son with eyes that had assessed thousands of business adversaries. For the first time in her life, she saw Edward not as her heir, but as her enemy. And the DNA tests? She asked coldly. Are they also part of this sophisticated scam? Edward shrugged. DNA tests can be manipulated, especially when you have enough money to corrupt lab technicians. It was a despicable lie, but Edward had repeated it so many times to the media that some had begun to believe it. The tabloid headlines were already speculating about the Great Montgomery hoax, and is the billion-dollar granddaughter real? My legal team, Edward continued, has also discovered some interesting inconsistencies in this Sarah's story. Did you know she had significant financial troubles before she found you? That her boyfriend has a petty theft record? Madeline stood up slowly, her voice dropping to the dangerously low register her employees had learned to fear. Edward, she said, each word articulated with surgical precision. I think you've confused who holds the power in this family. I built this empire. I control every share, every bank account, every business decision. And if you think you can use my own resources against me, she buzzed her intercom. Security, this is Madeline. I want Edward Montgomery escorted from the building, immediately. His access to all Montgomery Group facilities is revoked until further notice. Edward paled. You can't do that. I'm the designated CEO. I designated you CEO, and I am removing you from the position, effective immediately. When the security guards appeared at the door, Edward stood with wounded dignity, but Madeline could see the panic in his eyes. Mother, he said, his mask of control finally cracking. You're making a terrible mistake. That woman is going to destroy everything we've built. No, Madeline replied, as the guards escorted her son to the door. You already did, but Edward was right about one thing. The war was just beginning. That afternoon, Sarah called Madeline, crying hysterically. Grandmother, you have to help me. There are reporters everywhere. They're following me, taking pictures, shouting questions about me being a grifter. Miguel had to miss work because we can't leave our apartment without being mobbed. Madeline closed her eyes, feeling a fury so pure it was almost refreshing. Edward had taken the battle to the media, using family money to hire the most aggressive paparazzi in New York to torment Sarah. Darling, Madeline said softly, I want you and Miguel to pack a bag, immediately. I'm sending my personal driver to pick you up. You will stay at the mansion until this is resolved, but my job? I can't just stop working. I need the money. You never have to work again if you don't want to, Madeline interrupted. You are a Montgomery. It's time you started living like one. 2 hours later, Sarah and Miguel arrived at the mansion, completely overwhelmed by the grandeur that was now, technically, their home. The property was a palatial townhouse on the Upper East Side, a home that had once been called the most beautiful palace in America by Architectural Digest. "My God," Miguel murmured, looking at the 20-foot ceilings and paintings that were worth more than his lifetime salary. "This is where you should have grown up, Sarah." "No," Sarah replied sadly. "This is where I should have grown up." Madeline gave them a personal tour, showing them not just the grand rooms, but the more intimate spaces, the art studio she had dreamed her daughter Luna might one day paint in, the nursery she had kept intact for decades, hoping one day grandchildren would fill it with laughter. "This," she said, opening the door to a beautiful bedroom painted in soft shades of pink and gold, "was going to be your mother's room when she was a little girl. I never changed the decor. I guess I always hoped." Sarah walked slowly into the room, touching the antique cradle, the perfectly preserved vintage toys, the shelves full of children's books. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Luna, would have loved this place. And now your baby will use it, as it should have been from the start." But their moment of family peace was interrupted by the urgent ring of the telephone. It was Joaquin Herrera, Madeleine's lead counsel for 30 years. "Mrs. Montgomery," he said, his voice tense. "I need to see you immediately. Edward has escalated his legal actions significantly. He has filed a petition to have you declared mentally incompetent." The air left Madeleine's lungs as if she'd been physically punched. A mental incompetency petition, a conservatorship. If he succeeded, Edward could take control of the entire company, the entire fortune, even her personal freedom. He could nullify all the changes to her will, revoke Sarah's trust, and essentially erase her granddaughter from legal existence once more. "What evidence is he presenting?" she asked, keeping her voice calm for Sarah's sake, who had paled upon hearing the conversation. "He's arguing that the emotional shock of believing you found your granddaughter has led you to make irrational financial decisions. He has statements from employees saying you've been acting erratically, crying in meetings, making impulsive decisions." "All of which is true," Madeleine murmured. "I have been emotional. Anyone would be.